I'm Simone, 45 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, this office building in downtown Atlanta has been my second home. I started here as a junior analyst, fresh out of college, and worked my way up to a respected senior project manager. My dedication to Prestige Innovations, a leading tech solutions firm, was unwavering, a testament to my belief in hard work and meritocracy. I prided myself on my track record, consistently exceeding targets and mentoring countless new hires, many of whom were from diverse backgrounds like my own. My colleagues, from the mailroom staff to the executive suite, knew me as a reliable, fair, and highly competent professional. I'd navigated countless corporate shifts, weathered economic downturns, and always emerged stronger, my reputation for integrity intact. This company was more than just a paycheck. It was where I'd built a significant part of my identity, a place where I felt I belonged and could make a real difference. I had envisioned celebrating my 20-year anniversary here, perhaps even retiring from these very halls. Then, 6 months ago, the air in the office shifted, growing colder, more calculated. A new team lead, Brenda Carmichael, was brought in from an external consulting firm to streamline operations. Brenda was everything I wasn't, outwardly charming but with eyes that seemed to constantly calculate, a smile that didn't quite reach them. She was impeccably dressed, always on brand, and possessed an unsettling confidence that bordered on arrogance. From our first team meeting, a subtle unease settled over me. Brenda spoke in corporate jargon, emphasizing cultural fit and synergy in a way that felt vaguely threatening. She seemed to scan the room, her gaze lingering a moment too long on anyone who didn't quite conform to her unspoken ideal. It was a feeling I knew instinctively, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, attributing my discomfort to the natural friction of new leadership. After all, change is often difficult, and I had always adapted. I approached her with my usual openness, offering my experience and insights to help her transition smoothly into her role. I genuinely wanted her to succeed, believing that her success would ultimately benefit the entire team and the company. However, my attempts at collaboration were met with polite but firm dismissal. Brenda had a way of subtly undermining my suggestions in public, then later claiming them as her own in private conversations with upper management. It was a passive-aggressive dance I was slowly beginning to recognize, a pattern designed to isolate and diminish. The atmosphere in our team meetings grew increasingly strained, the easy camaraderie replaced by a palpable tension. I noticed she favored certain team members, those who mirrored her background and style, while others, particularly those of us with long tenures or diverse perspectives, found ourselves increasingly marginalized. Our ideas were overlooked, our contributions downplayed, and our voices seemed to fade into the background. It was a slow, insidious process, like a current gradually pulling you out to sea. The first direct sign came during a one-on-one review. Brenda praised my technical competence, but then pivoted, stating, "Simone, you're incredibly skilled, but sometimes you just don't seem to fit in with the new direction we're taking. We need someone with a more modern approach, a different kind of energy." Her words were vague, yet the implication was crystal clear, a coded message I understood all too well. I left that meeting with a knot in my stomach, the casual dismissal of my 2 decades of loyalty echoing in my ears. Not fitting in, a phrase often used to mask deeper, more insidious biases. It was a blow, but also a call to action. I realized then that my long-standing dedication meant little to Brenda. She saw me as an obstacle, not an asset. The next few weeks were a blur of escalating microaggressions. My projects were suddenly subjected to intense scrutiny, deadlines were tightened unreasonably, and my emails went unanswered for days. I was excluded from key strategy meetings, my input no longer deemed necessary. It felt like walking through a minefield, constantly anticipating the next slight, the next deliberate attempt to diminish my presence. I observed Brenda's interactions with other team members, noting the subtle differences in her tone, her body language, and the opportunities she extended. It became evident that her new direction was less about innovation and more about cultivating a homogeneous environment, one where conformity was prized above all else. My intuition, honed over years of navigating corporate landscapes, screamed that something was deeply wrong. My colleagues, many of whom had once sought my advice, now seemed hesitant to engage, their eyes darting nervously when Brenda was near. The unspoken fear in the office was palpable, a chilling reminder of the power dynamics at play. It was clear that Brenda's agenda was not just about streamlining, it was about systematically weeding out those she deemed undesirable, those who didn't align with her narrow vision of fit. I began documenting everything: dates, times, specific comments, and instances of exclusion. Every dismissive glance, every thinly veiled insult, every unfair critique became a data point. I knew deep down that this wasn't just about my performance. It was about something far more insidious, something I had encountered before in different forms throughout my career. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a battle. The company that had once felt like a second home now felt like a hostile territory, its familiar corridors transformed into a maze of unspoken rules and hidden agendas. The joy I once derived from my work was slowly being replaced by a gnawing sense of injustice and a fierce determination to uncover the truth. I knew I couldn't let Brenda's actions go unchallenged, not for myself, but for every other person who had ever been told they didn't fit in. My journey to expose Brenda had begun, not with anger, but with a quiet, resolute purpose. I understood that to fight this battle, I needed to be strategic, methodical, and utterly relentless. The game had changed, and I was ready to play, not by her rules, but by the undeniable truth of my contributions and her discriminatory practices. The new direction Brenda spoke of quickly morphed into a series of vague, subjective metrics that seemed designed to target specific individuals. My team, once a cohesive unit, began to fracture under the weight of her constant, often contradictory, demands. She introduced culture fit assessments that felt more like personality tests, probing into personal interests and communication styles in a way that felt intrusive and irrelevant to our actual work. I noticed that the team members who thrived under Brenda's leadership were those who actively mirrored her communication style and social habits. They were the ones invited to impromptu coffee breaks and after-work drinks, while the rest of us were left out of the loop. This created an in-group and out-group dynamic that eroded morale and fostered an environment of suspicion and resentment. My contributions, once celebrated, were now consistently minimized or outright ignored in team discussions. I would present a well-researched proposal, only for Brenda to nod dismissively, then later praise a similar, less developed idea from one of her favored colleagues. It was a subtle form of gaslighting, making me question my own value and the clarity of my communication. The feedback I received became increasingly abstract. Instead of concrete performance issues, I was told I needed to be more collaborative or show more initiative, despite actively leading several successful cross-departmental projects. These critiques were impossible to address because they lacked any specific examples, serving only to create a pervasive sense of inadequacy. I started observing how Brenda interacted with different team members. With some, she was warm and encouraging, offering mentorship and opportunities. With others, like me, her tone was clipped, her expressions distant, and her feedback consistently negative. The disparity was stark, and it became clear that her assessment of fit was deeply rooted in subjective, rather than objective criteria. The office environment, once vibrant and diverse, began to feel stiflingly homogeneous. People started to self-censor, afraid to express dissenting opinions or bring their authentic selves to work. The creative energy that once defined our team slowly dissipated, replaced by a cautious conformity. It was as if a silent directive had been issued: blend in or be pushed out. I also noticed a pattern in the projects assigned. The high-profile, impactful assignments were increasingly given to Brenda's inner circle, while I was relegated to routine, less visible tasks. This not only limited my opportunities for growth, but also subtly diminished my perceived value within the department. It was a strategic move to make me appear less essential. The casual conversations in the break room, once a source of connection and laughter, became hushed and guarded when Brenda was around. People avoided eye contact, and discussions quickly shifted to superficial topics. The fear of being overheard, of saying something that might be misconstrued as not fitting in, was a constant, unspoken presence. I began to feel an intense isolation, despite being surrounded by colleagues. The camaraderie I had built over years seemed to evaporate under Brenda's influence. It was a painful realization that the professional relationships I valued were fragile, easily broken by the subtle pressures of a toxic work environment. My sense of belonging was slowly being eroded. My long-standing mentor within the company, a senior executive named Robert, noticed the change in my demeanor. He pulled me aside one day, expressing concern. "Simone, you seem different. Is everything all right?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but his genuine concern prompted me to share some of my observations about Brenda. Robert listened intently, his expression grim. He advised me to continue documenting everything, emphasizing the importance of objective evidence. "These kinds of battles are rarely won on emotion, Simone," he cautioned. "You need facts, patterns, and irrefutable proof." His words solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my feelings. It was about a systemic issue. I started cross-referencing Brenda's public statements about diversity and inclusion with her actual hiring and promotion practices. The discrepancy was glaring. While she preached about embracing differences, her actions told a different story, one of actively cultivating a team that looked and thought remarkably similar to herself. The subtle racism was never overt, never a direct slur or discriminatory remark. Instead, it manifested as a constant questioning of my judgment, a dismissal of my experience, and an underlying assumption of my inadequacy. It was the insidious kind of discrimination that leaves no visible bruises but slowly erodes your confidence and sense of worth. I understood then that Brenda's objective was not just to remove me, but to make me question myself, to internalize the narrative that I was somehow deficient. But I refused to let her win that mental battle. My nearly 2 decades of consistent performance and positive feedback were my shield, a reminder of my true capabilities. This period of subtle oppression sharpened my focus. I knew I had to be smarter, more strategic. The game was being played on a different field now, one where appearances mattered more than substance, and where fit was a weapon. I was ready to turn her own tactics against her, to expose the true nature of her new direction. The subtle shifts soon gave way to more overt forms of pressure. Brenda began scheduling meetings at inconvenient times, often late in the day or early in the morning, knowing I had family commitments. She would then criticize my lack of flexibility when I couldn't attend, despite my willingness to catch up on minutes and action items. It was a deliberate attempt to create an impression of unreliability. My performance reviews, once glowing, became a litany of vague criticisms. Brenda would focus on subjective qualities like team integration and adaptability, giving me low scores without providing concrete examples of where I fell short. When I pressed for specifics, she would deflect, saying, "It's more about a general feeling, Simone, a cultural alignment." She started assigning me tasks that were clearly outside my expertise or beneath my pay grade, seemingly designed to frustrate me or make me appear incompetent. I was asked to organize team social events, a task typically handled by administrative staff, or to compile basic data reports that junior analysts usually managed. These were deliberate attempts to sideline me. The isolation tactics intensified. My direct reports were subtly encouraged to bypass me and report directly to Brenda, effectively stripping me of my authority. Information that I needed to do my job was withheld, or I received it late, making it difficult to meet deadlines. It was a systematic effort to cut me off from the vital arteries of the team. During team meetings, Brenda would frequently interrupt me, dismiss my points with a wave of her hand, or openly question my judgment in front of others. Her tone was always polite, almost saccharine, which made it harder to call out without appearing overly sensitive. It was a masterclass in professional bullying, designed to erode my confidence publicly. I noticed that she would often praise my colleagues, particularly those she favored, for ideas that I had previously suggested and had been ignored. This blatant appropriation of my intellectual contributions was infuriating, but I maintained my composure, knowing that reacting emotionally was exactly what she wanted. My silence was strategic. The stress began to take a toll. I found myself constantly replaying conversations, analyzing every interaction, and second-guessing my every move. Sleep became elusive, and the joy I once found in my work was replaced by a constant sense of dread. It was a psychological war, and Brenda was relentless in her campaign. My family and close friends noticed a change in me. I was more withdrawn, less enthusiastic, and constantly preoccupied. When they asked what was wrong, I struggled to articulate the insidious nature of the discrimination I was facing. It wasn't a single, overt act, but a relentless barrage of subtle slights that chipped away at my spirit. I continued to document everything, meticulously recording dates, times, and specific instances of unfair treatment. I created a separate, secure file, knowing that this evidence would be crucial if I ever decided to take formal action. Every coded remark, every dismissive gesture, every instance of exclusion was logged with objective precision. I also started reaching out to former colleagues who had left the company, discreetly asking about their experiences under new leadership. I discovered a pattern. Several talented individuals from diverse backgrounds had also left suddenly, citing similar vague reasons about not fitting in or cultural misalignment. This confirmed my suspicions. I began to understand that Brenda's actions were not just personal, they were systemic. She was implementing a discriminatory agenda under the guise of cultural transformation. My fight was no longer just about my job. It was about exposing a pattern of injustice that affected others, past and potentially future. The pressure intensified with a formal performance improvement plan, PIP, that landed on my desk. It was filled with the same vague criticisms, setting impossible targets, and a ridiculously short timeline for improvement. It was a clear signal. They were building a paper trail to justify my eventual termination, regardless of my efforts. I knew the PIP was a formality, a corporate tool designed to push me out. My response was not to despair, but to steel my resolve. I would comply with every requirement, meticulously documenting my efforts, knowing that my true battle lay elsewhere. This was just another piece of their carefully constructed narrative, one I intended to dismantle. The feeling of being cornered, of having my career and reputation threatened, ignited a fire within me. The fear was replaced by a cold, calculated determination. I had spent too long building my career, too long contributing to this company, to let it be destroyed by someone else's prejudice. This was not just about survival, it was about justice. I looked at the PP document, not as a defeat, but as a weapon handed to me. It was their attempt to control the narrative, but I knew the true story. And I was ready to tell it, not just to my superiors, but to anyone who would listen, ensuring that Brenda's downfall would indeed be swift and undeniable. The day finally came as I knew it would. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and bright outside, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere within the office. Brenda called me into a small, sterile conference room, accompanied by an HR representative whose face was impassive, betraying no emotion. The air was thick with unspoken finality. Brenda began with a practiced, regretful tone, reciting lines about difficult decisions and business needs. She informed me that, despite my efforts during the performance improvement plan, my role was being eliminated due to restructuring and a misalignment with the company's evolving strategic direction. The HR representative sat silently, occasionally nodding. I listened calmly, my heart pounding, but my expression unreadable. I knew this was coming, had prepared for it, yet the words still landed with a dull thud. 20 years of dedication, loyalty, and countless sacrifices, all dismissed with a few corporate buzzwords. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in my mouth. Brenda then presented me with a severance package agreement, a document filled with legalese and clauses designed to silence me. It offered a paltry sum in exchange for my signature, which would waive my right to sue the company for wrongful termination or discrimination. It was a standard corporate maneuver designed to buy my silence cheaply. "We believe this is a fair and generous offer, Simone," Brenda said, her voice devoid of genuine empathy. "It will allow you to transition smoothly into your next opportunity." The condescension in her tone was thinly veiled, a final jab designed to reinforce her perceived victory. She truly believed she had won. I looked at the document, then back at Brenda, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. "Thank you for the offer, Brenda," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'll need to review this with my attorney before making any decisions." The HR representative subtly shifted, a flicker of surprise in their eyes. Brenda's confident demeanor wavered slightly. "Of course, take your time," she replied, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice. "But please understand, this offer is time-sensitive." She clearly expected me to be distraught, to accept the terms out of desperation, to simply disappear quietly. But I was not distraught. The moment she uttered those words, "Your role is being eliminated," a profound sense of liberation washed over me, immediately followed by a cold, hard resolve. This was not an ending. It was the beginning of my counteroffensive. Her attempt to force me out had just sealed her own fate. I gathered my personal belongings from my desk, the familiar items now imbued with a sense of finality. As I packed, I made sure to discreetly secure the last pieces of evidence I needed, information I had been carefully collecting for months. Every file, every email, every documented interaction was a weapon in my arsenal. As I walked out of the office, I passed Brenda's glass-walled office. She glanced up, a triumphant smirk on her face. I met her gaze, not with anger or sadness, but with a quiet, knowing look that seemed to wipe the smirk clean off her face. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. Stepping out into the bright Atlanta sunshine, I took a deep breath. The weight of the oppressive office environment lifted instantly. The air felt cleaner, the sky bluer. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls, one to my trusted mentor, Robert, and another to the employment lawyer I had discreetly consulted weeks prior. "They just let me go," I stated calmly to my lawyer, Sarah Jenkins. "And I have everything you need." Sarah's voice on the other end was firm and reassuring. "Excellent, Simone. This is exactly what we were waiting for. Meet me at my office this afternoon." The plan was already in motion. The initial shock of being dismissed quickly gave way to a surge of adrenaline and purpose. This wasn't a setback. It was the necessary catalyst. Brenda had underestimated me, assuming I would simply fade away. But she had poked a sleeping giant, and I was now fully awake, ready to fight. I spent the rest of the day meticulously organizing my evidence, creating a timeline of events, and annotating key documents. Every instance of discrimination, every vague criticism, every exclusionary tactic was laid bare, forming an undeniable pattern of targeted harassment and prejudice. The story was clear. There was no sadness, no regret, only a fierce determination to ensure that what happened to me would not happen to anyone else under Brenda's leadership. My departure would not be a quiet exit. It would be a seismic event that exposed the rot within Prestige Innovations. Brenda thought she had dismissed a problem. In reality, she had just created her own worst nightmare. My forced exit was not her victory. It was the first domino in her swift and undeniable downfall. I was ready to watch it all unfold. The meeting with Sarah Jenkins, my employment lawyer, was a turning point. I laid out all my meticulously gathered evidence, the detailed logs of discriminatory remarks, the performance reviews with their vague criticisms, the emails excluding me from key meetings, and the documented instances of Brenda's favoritism. Sarah reviewed everything with a keen, analytical eye. "Simone, this is compelling," Sarah stated, her voice firm. "The pattern of not fitting in combined with the sudden restructuring after your long tenure points strongly to a discriminatory termination. We have a strong case for wrongful dismissal and potentially a discrimination claim." Her words were a balm to my wounded professional pride. Sarah advised me to keep a low profile for a short period, allowing her to initiate the formal legal process. She explained the steps, filing a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, and preparing for potential litigation. "Our goal is not just compensation, Simone," she emphasized, but to expose Brenda's practices and ensure accountability. While Sarah worked on the legal front, I began my own deeper investigation. I reached out to former colleagues who had left Prestige Innovations under similar circumstances, discreetly asking them to share their experiences. Many were hesitant at first, fearing repercussions, but my story resonated, and slowly, a few brave individuals began to open up. I discovered that Brenda had a history of similar restructurings at previous companies, always resulting in the departure of experienced, diverse employees. It was a pattern, a modus operandi she had perfected. Identify targets, create a paper trail of vague performance issues, then execute a restructuring to force them out. One former colleague, Maria, shared a particularly damning piece of information. She had witnessed Brenda making a racially insensitive comment during an informal team lunch, dismissing a cultural tradition as quaint and inefficient. Maria had documented it, but never acted on it, fearing for her own job. This was the direct evidence we needed. I also delved into public records and professional networking sites, looking for any connections Brenda might have had that could explain her swift ascent and unchecked power. I found a surprising link. Brenda had close ties to a senior executive on Prestige Innovation's board, a connection that explained her immunity from internal scrutiny. My investigation extended to the company's internal reports and public statements. I cross-referenced their official diversity and inclusion policies with Brenda's actual hiring and promotion statistics within her department. The disparity was stark, revealing a hypocritical facade that would be impossible for the company to defend. I also started networking with industry peers outside of Prestige Innovations, subtly gathering intelligence about Brenda's professional reputation. I learned that she was known for her ruthless efficiency, but also for a high turnover rate in her teams, often leaving a trail of disgruntled former employees in her wake. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Brenda wasn't just a difficult manager, she was a systemic problem, a person who actively perpetuated discrimination under the guise of corporate efficiency. Her actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a calculated strategy to reshape the workforce in her own image. I shared all my findings with Sarah, who meticulously integrated them into our legal strategy. The combination of my personal experience, the testimonies of former colleagues, the documented patterns, and the direct evidence of discriminatory remarks created an irrefutable case. We were building a fortress of truth. The process was emotionally draining, revisiting painful memories and confronting the injustice I had endured. But each new piece of evidence, each confirmation of Brenda's pattern, fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about holding powerful individuals accountable and protecting others. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a clarity that had been missing during my final months at Prestige Innovations. My forced exit, initially a source of pain, had transformed into a powerful catalyst for justice. Brenda's actions had inadvertently given me the tools and the motivation to expose her. The suspense was building, not just for Brenda, but for the entire leadership team at Prestige Innovations. They believed they had quietly removed a problem. They had no idea that I was meticulously preparing to expose a much larger, more damaging truth that would shake their corporate foundations. My quiet investigation was nearing its end, and the time for action was approaching. The veil of secrecy Brenda had carefully constructed was about to be ripped away, revealing the discriminatory practices she had so skillfully hidden. Her downfall, I knew, would be swift and public. With Sarah's legal expertise and my mountain of evidence, we meticulously crafted our countermove. Our strategy was not just to file a lawsuit, but to ensure maximum impact and public exposure, forcing Prestige Innovations to confront Brenda's discriminatory practices head-on. We aimed for a settlement that included not just financial compensation, but also a commitment to systemic change within the company. Our first step was to send a detailed demand letter to Prestige Innovations' legal department, outlining all the allegations, supported by the extensive documentation I had compiled. The letter was firm, professional, and left no room for ambiguity regarding the nature of Brenda's actions and the company's potential liability. It was designed to send a clear message: we were serious and we were prepared. The company's initial response was predictable, a denial of wrongdoing and an attempt to dismiss my claims as unfounded. They reiterated their generous severance offer, clearly hoping I would back down. But Sarah and I were prepared for this. It was part of their playbook, a tactic to test our resolve. We rejected their counteroffer immediately. Sarah then filed the official discrimination complaint with the EEOC, a federal agency that investigates workplace discrimination. This formal step would trigger an investigation, bringing external scrutiny to Prestige Innovations and, more specifically, to Brenda Carmichael's conduct. The clock was now ticking for them. Simultaneously, I leveraged my network, discreetly sharing my story with trusted journalists who specialized in workplace issues and corporate accountability. I provided them with anonymized details of Brenda's patterns and the company's apparent complicity, planting the seeds for a potential media expose if the legal process stalled. The suspense in the air was palpable, at least for me. I imagined the frantic meetings happening within Prestige Innovations' executive suites as they grappled with the implications of our legal actions. They had underestimated my resolve and my meticulous preparation. Their quiet dismissal was now threatening to become a very public scandal. Brenda, still oblivious to the full extent of my actions, continued her work at Prestige Innovations, likely confident that my departure was a closed chapter. This overconfidence was her greatest weakness, allowing me to build my case without her anticipating the full force of what was coming. Her downfall would indeed be instant, because she wouldn't see it coming. My mentor, Robert, though no longer directly involved, continued to offer quiet support and advice. He confirmed that Brenda's restructuring had indeed caused significant internal turmoil and that many employees were quietly disgruntled. His insights reinforced the systemic nature of the problem. We strategically leaked a few key pieces of information to internal company contacts, just enough to create a ripple of unease and curiosity within the organization. Whispers began circulating about Simone's lawsuit and HR investigations, creating a climate of suspicion around Brenda's leadership. The company's legal team, realizing the gravity of the situation, eventually requested a mediation session. This was a sign that they were taking our claims seriously and wanted to avoid a prolonged, public legal battle. It was a small victory, confirming that our strategic pressure was working. During the mediation, Sarah presented our full case, including the damning testimony from former colleagues and the direct evidence of Brenda's discriminatory remarks. The company's lawyers, initially dismissive, grew visibly uncomfortable as the weight of the evidence mounted against them. Brenda herself was not present at the initial mediation, a deliberate choice by the company to keep her insulated. But her actions were the central focus, and the detailed account of her behavior painted a clear picture of a toxic and discriminatory work environment she had cultivated. I maintained a calm, resolute demeanor throughout the mediation, allowing Sarah to do the talking. My presence was a silent reminder of the human cost of Brenda's actions, a living embodiment of the injustice she had inflicted. My composure was my strength, a stark contrast to the chaos Brenda had created. The company's lawyers, faced with irrefutable evidence and the threat of public exposure, began to shift their stance. The initial denial gave way to a grudging acknowledgement of unfortunate circumstances. The tide was turning, and Brenda's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to crumble. This was the moment I had been working towards, the culmination of months of quiet preparation and strategic planning. Brenda's reign of subtle discrimination was about to come to a very abrupt and public end. The stage was set for her downfall. The mediation session escalated quickly once the full weight of our evidence was presented. The company's legal team, facing undeniable proof of Brenda Carmichael's discriminatory practices and the potential for a devastating public relations nightmare, changed their strategy entirely. They realized this was no longer about a simple severance package. It was about protecting the company's reputation and avoiding a major lawsuit. Brenda was finally called into the mediation, her face a mask of feigned composure. She clearly expected to walk in and dismiss my claims, but the atmosphere in the room was tense, her usual confident smirk absent. The company's lead lawyer, usually her staunch defender, now looked at her with a strained expression. Sarah began by calmly detailing the allegations, presenting the meticulously organized evidence, the testimonials from former employees, the documented pattern of restructurings targeting diverse individuals, and finally, Maria's direct testimony about Brenda's racially insensitive comment. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow. Brenda's composure visibly cracked. Her eyes darted nervously between me, Sarah, and her own legal counsel. She tried to interrupt, to deny, to deflect, but Sarah calmly presented the next piece of evidence, each one corroborating the last, painting an undeniable picture of systemic discrimination. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. The company's lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, intervened, cutting Brenda off. "Ms. Carmichael, we have reviewed the evidence. This is a serious matter." The message was clear. Brenda was no longer being protected. She was now a liability. The shift in allegiance was immediate and brutal. I watched Brenda's face drain of color as the full weight of her actions, now exposed and undeniable, crashed down on her. The woman who had systematically attempted to dismantle my career, who had dismissed my 2 decades of loyalty, now sat utterly exposed, her power stripped away. The vengeance I sought was unfolding before my eyes. The company offered a substantial settlement, far exceeding the initial severance package. More importantly, they agreed to an internal investigation into Brenda's conduct, a commitment to diversity training, and a review of their cultural fit metrics. It was a clear admission of guilt, albeit unspoken. Brenda, realizing her career at Prestige Innovations was over, became agitated. She tried to argue to defend herself, but her own lawyers advised her to remain silent. Her downfall was indeed instant, unfolding in real time within the sterile walls of that mediation room. Her carefully built empire of prejudice was collapsing. Within hours of the mediation concluding, the news began to ripple through Prestige Innovations. An internal memo was circulated, vaguely announcing Brenda Carmichael's immediate departure due to a misalignment with company values. The careful wording couldn't hide the truth from those who knew. The whispers in the office quickly turned into open discussion. Employees who had been silenced by fear now felt empowered to share their own stories of Brenda's discriminatory behavior. The dam had broken, and a flood of truth washed over the company, exposing the toxic culture she had fostered. The media contacts I had discreetly cultivated also picked up on the story. A prominent business journal published an investigative piece detailing Brenda's pattern of discriminatory practices at Prestige Innovations and her previous companies, citing multiple anonymous sources and internal documents. The public downfall had begun. Brenda's professional reputation was shattered. The ruthless efficiency she was once praised for was now recast as blatant discrimination. Her network, once a source of power, quickly distanced themselves. The very qualities she used to climb the corporate ladder became the instruments of her spectacular fall. I received calls and messages from former colleagues expressing their gratitude and relief. "You did it, Simone," Maria said, her voice filled with emotion. "You stood up for all of us." Their validation was more meaningful than any financial settlement. The vindication was profound, not just for me, but for every individual who had ever been told they didn't fit in because of who they were. Brenda's instant downfall was a powerful message that discrimination, no matter how subtle, would not go unpunished. I watched her public and professional demise from a distance, feeling no malice, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served. Her attempt to force me out had not only failed, but had inadvertently paved the way for her own spectacular ruin. The dust settled quickly after Brenda Carmichael's abrupt departure and the ensuing media coverage. Prestige Innovations, eager to mitigate further damage, publicly reaffirmed its commitment to diversity and inclusion, launching new initiatives and reviewing its internal policies. While these changes were overdue, they were a direct result of the stand I had taken, a testament to the power of speaking truth to power. My settlement allowed me a period of much-needed rest and reflection. I used the time to reconnect with my family, to heal from the emotional toll of the battle, and to envision a future unburdened by corporate politics and discrimination. The financial security provided a foundation for new possibilities, a true liberation. The news of my successful stand against Prestige Innovations spread quickly within the industry. I began receiving numerous offers from other companies, not just for my project management skills, but for my courage and integrity. My reputation, far from being tarnished by the dismissal, had been elevated, transforming me into an advocate for ethical leadership. I chose to accept a senior leadership role at a smaller, values-driven tech startup in Atlanta, one that genuinely prioritized diversity, equity, and inclusion. This new environment was a stark contrast to Prestige Innovations, fostering a culture of mutual respect and authentic collaboration. It felt like coming home, but to a better, healthier version. Brenda Carmichael's downfall was complete. Her name became synonymous with discriminatory practices, and her career in corporate leadership effectively ended. The executive who had once been her patron on the board of Prestige Innovations also faced scrutiny and quietly retired, a ripple effect of the truth I had exposed. I found immense satisfaction in mentoring young professionals, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, sharing my story and empowering them to recognize and challenge subtle forms of discrimination. My experience, once a source of pain, became a powerful tool for guidance and inspiration, transforming adversity into advocacy. My 20-year anniversary, which I had almost celebrated at Prestige Innovations, became a different kind of milestone. It was the anniversary of my liberation, of reclaiming my voice and my worth. The years of dedication were not wasted. They had simply prepared me for a greater purpose, a more authentic path. I continued to stay connected with Sarah Jenkins, my lawyer, and Robert, my mentor. They became trusted allies in my new mission, supporting my efforts to promote equitable workplaces. Our shared experience forged bonds of respect and camaraderie that transcended professional boundaries. The not fitting in narrative that Brenda had tried to impose on me had been thoroughly debunked. My value, my skills, and my identity were not defined by her narrow prejudices. Instead, they were affirmed by my resilience, my courage, and the positive impact I had on others. I learned that true power lies not in controlling others, but in standing firm in your truth. Brenda's attempt to diminish me had inadvertently amplified my voice, turning a personal injustice into a catalyst for broader change within the industry. My story became a beacon for others facing similar challenges. My life in Atlanta flourished. I embraced the city's vibrant culture, its rich history, and its diverse communities, finding a sense of belonging that had been missing in the sterile corporate environment I had left behind. My personal and professional lives became deeply intertwined, each enriching the other. The memory of Brenda Carmichael and her actions served as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance and integrity. But it no longer held power over me. It was a chapter closed, a lesson learned, a battle won. My focus was firmly on the future, on building a legacy of fairness and empowerment. I often reflect on the moment I was forced out, the initial shock, and the immediate resolve that followed. It was a crossroads, a moment of profound decision. I chose to fight, not just for myself, but for the principle of justice, and that choice made all the difference. My journey was a testament to the fact that even in the face of systemic discrimination, one person's courage can spark a revolution. Brenda's downfall was not just her personal ruin, it was a victory for integrity, for diversity, and for everyone who has ever been made to feel like they don't fit in. I am Simone, and my story is a reminder that sometimes the end of one chapter is simply the dramatic beginning of a far more powerful and purposeful one. My worth was never in question, only Brenda's ability to see it. The final act of my story is not about what I lost, but about everything I gained. My voice, my purpose, and the undeniable truth that my strength was always within me, waiting to be unleashed.